Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Burch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. Today's episode is all about collaboration. I want you to hear collaboration stories of people that come together and create something or do something, and I hope that they inspire you so that you too can find ways to collaborate. Why collaboration? Because we as humans are better together. And yes, collaboration takes time, it takes energy, it takes push and pull and flexibility, but it's totally worth it. And this features two return guests to the podcast. You're going to hear from Karen Bruno, who works with the Lawrence Girls Choir, Community Girls Choir in Appleton, Wisconsin. She was episode 7. And from that conversation in episode 7, we dreamed up the idea of collaborating together. Then you'll also see in this episode composer and educator Matt Carlson, who you heard in episode 20. And it was during the time that we were getting to know each other making that recording that we put the pieces together and created this beautiful collaboration that developed into a multi-layer, beautifully sequenced cake because of our singers. I hope that you get something out of this. I'm so sincerely thankful that you are listening. As always, the Music Ed Matters podcast is brought to you by our friends over at the Kinnison Choral Company. Check out emilyburch.org/sponsors to find out more, especially the rehearsal calculator. It is the bomb. But without further ado, you could totally use that calculator to find time for collaborations within rehearsal. Just saying. Here is a collaboration story with Karen Bruno and Matt Carlson. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we have two fantastic returning guests, composer Matt Carlson and choral educator extraordinaire Karen Bruno. Hey, friends.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm so excited to have repeat guests. I know that Karen was on episode 7 way back when, and Matt came on as one of our repertoire exploration episodes back in episode 20. And since then, we had a massive collaboration. Who wants to talk about it?
Oh gosh, there's so much to say, and I'm just so sad that it's over. That's what I really want to say.
I was really looking forward to this conversation because when it ended, I wanted to shed some tears, but I knew we would have this moment to unpack the whole thing. So for someone who has no idea what we're talking about, who collaborated, when, where, why, how?
Well, okay, so I'll do some of that. We can tag team a little bit.
Sure.
So I am really grateful that during COVID, we had this sort of brainstorm to bring our singers together because, in a typical year, we would be, getting our singers in front of a guest conductor or bringing them to, taking them out on the road somewhere and going to a festival or doing some sort of, bringing in another choir to visit us. There would be different kinds of sort of what we consider normal collaborations, which of course nobody could do this year because we're all on the screen. So I loved that, that we were able to sort of think creatively about how to use technology in our favor to bring our singers together, to give them the opportunity to get to know other singers their age, and to honestly, I think the most powerful part, figure out what it was like to make music in this virtual landscape in a meaningful and powerful way so that they felt as though their voices were being heard literally and figuratively through this process.
I think that was beautifully stated. And I love that mission statement, we wrote those objectives together, you and I, in the beginning, before we even designed what we were going to do. We wrote these objectives of what were the objectives of this rehearsal and these meetups. And it was even more beautiful than we imagined with having meaning and connecting in ways and making music in a way that was unbelievably unexpected in a virtual landscape.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful part of these types of collaborations is you can, it's important to go in, first of all, knowing what you're aiming at, right? I think if we had gone in without having those conversations ahead of time to think about what we wanted our singers to experience, it would have been less successful. But then, allowing, having these plans, but holding them with open hands to say, and also we're going to take the direction our singers, we're going to follow the lead of our singers, we're going to take the direction that they point us in, continue to circle back to the outcomes that we're looking for, but ultimately to really honor their choices and their experiences and their voices in the process.
The whole process became really democratic. Matt, talk
Sure.
about how you fit into this whole thing.
So my journey kind of started separate from Karen and Emmy because I started by writing a piece called Begin. I believe that was talked about in episode 20, my last appearance on the show. And I wrote that for Gettysburg Children's Choir's summer camp, which we ran online. ICES directed that. And I went into writing the piece knowing that it was going to be a virtual performance. So I made this big old Logic project with all the instruments, and I had all the practice tracks, and I had the click track kind of set up. So that technology has come more naturally to me, and I think to all of us over the course of the past few months. And I also wrote the piece in response to the pandemic, in response to the movement for Black Lives, in response to the massive changes that our world has endured throughout this time. So I think that combining the piece specifically written for Zoom Choir with content that is specifically about our world right now, I think that was kind of the perfect marriage for what your choirs were looking for.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We didn't even know it was going to come out. I think we came into the conversation with your choir, Karen, that has been around for 35 years.
30, yep.
30, okay, 30 years. My choir, who's been
Me
around
too
for
much.
5. Well, I was adding the choirs together. Together, we've been around 35 years.
Oh,
Because
I
we've
see.
been around 5 years. I did that accidentally. I'm not really a math person. But what was so amazing was to see our singers look up to the culture and the community you have built over a 30-year tenure. So for a small choir in Savannah, Georgia, to see, oh my goodness, there are people just like me in Wisconsin, 1,000 miles away, that have been singing in choir, and this choir has been around for 30 years. And they started thinking about, what does that mean for Rise? And it has changed the overall investment in them, in everything that we do, because they're seeing there's longevity, there's a long-term path in this community that we're building around choir. So that really impacted our organization. But can we talk about how we got them actually conversing? So first rehearsal, we jump in, we worked the first semester on Begin because it was already written and it gave us really awesome words to unpack. So how did we get the kids talking in the beginning?
So if memory serves, I think we really continued every rehearsal. And this was, we only had, 3 rehearsals, excuse me, in that first semester together.
3 in the
So it was
fall and 3 in the spring. Is that
2,
correct?
I think, in the spring. Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't while it was a long form experience, it wasn't that we had tons and tons of time together. So I do want to lift that up too, that I feel like we were super efficient with this. And part of that efficiency is because we spent time before those rehearsals really creating the right questions to ask. And I think that questioning technique, looking at the sort of the affective outcomes of what we wanted our students to explore really helped frame the process. So when we were able to ask specific questions about the repertoire or about ideas within the repertoire, or connect that to other, just little folk songs that we were singing and sharing it beforehand, just sort of finding that through line so that they felt safe together and confident in the exploration process. I think those things were really foundational to making it work. I think, having a piece like Begin that was so specific to, the pandemic and the kinds of things we wanted to explore with our singers was the icing on the cake. But I think really knowing that we went in to explore these affective concepts of personal growth and of gratitude and of noticing things in their world, noticing the changes in their world in a really positive way, helped us then dig into the repertoire that we were choosing along the way.
And that was so important to create that culture, because the way that the text for the new piece came about was by giving them specific prompts and sending them into breakout rooms to discuss them. And then they would come back in and populate the Zoom chat and then just fill that up. And then that was adapted into the lyrics.
That was also my favorite line when we were making up what would you title a piece of music, or if you had to title our collaboration, what would you title it?
Mm-hmm.
And the 1,000-mile collaboration always sticks out. That's the little post we got submitted and wrote up together. That was fun to talk about.
That was really fun.
So in a nutshell, we had this when we sat down the first time. If you're thinking, okay, what am I taking away from this episode? Well, the first thing is collaboration is important, and it needs to be part of your DNA, and finding someone that you can collaborate with. We sat down individually, Matt and myself, Karen and myself, and decided, okay, there's something here. We agree fundamentally on a lot of things, and our singers could benefit from getting to know each other. So that's the first step is, are you on the same page, or can you be on two separate pages and still gain information from each other and grow in a new direction? And then we established the framework, the number of rehearsals, the amount of hours, and then how each of us played into that. And we met briefly before each session, about 30 minutes, to make sure we knew the flow. And we became dynamite team teachers, y'all.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was really cool to see that unfold. And then we utilized the resources in front of us, whether that was a tool in Google or the chat bar or the breakout room or unmuting or different things like that in our Zoom space. Then when did the shift happen? I think it was January when we moved it for y'all's football game.
Yeah.
When we came back after that, it was like everyone was ready to connect because they missed it.
Yeah. And not only did they miss it, but at that point we had finished Begin. They had had that experience together, and they had, I don't think they'd seen the video yet. Had they
No,
seen
I
the
showed
video
it
yet?
at that. And I'll put the
Showed
link
it
to the
then.
video in these episode notes.
Great. But what had happened in the meantime was they cared, at least my singers did, really deeply about giving you clean audio files. I mean, they really wanted this product to be something they were proud of, because they had invested so much personally in the process of learning the music and sharing the ideas and thoughts with one another. That project became sort of a touchstone for them. And really, I think that was the turning point, because they had space, right? So we didn't meet after, I think January or December 7th or something was our last one in the fall. And then we didn't meet until the very end of January. So it had been a good 6 weeks before they had interacted with each other, or since they had interacted with each other. And so having that time and having the project take place, I think were all ways that kind of kept them motivated to come back and restart.
I agree completely. Matt, can we talk about what happened for you as the composer? Because
We should, because it blew my mind.
Okay, tell the listener what happened. How did it happen? I'm going to shut up and mute because this is epic.
So as a composer, what gives me joy is writing music as vehicles for learning, as vehicles for growing as humans. And that's why I'm in this. And I think that too often choirs get a little too wrapped up in getting in the composer's head and making sure that like they are communicating the composer's intent through the music, and that becomes the objective. The thing that kind of changed my life through this collaboration is, because of this framework that we created, instead of the choir trying to get inside my head, it was really me trying to get inside the choir's. It was me trying to take all of the inspirational words that they came up with, all of the musical and thematic elements that they brainstormed, to take those and turn that into a piece that sounds like the 1,000-Mile Choir. And that was such a unique and rewarding and brilliant challenge. And it really changed the way that I think about composition. I'm the kind of teacher, and I know that Karen and Emmy, you are too, where it's about us. It's not about me. It's not about one. It's about all. That's what choir's about. That's why we come back to it so much. And the more I can write music that creates a space for democratic processes, that creates a space where every voice is valued, and creates this across the nation instead of in the same room together was really powerful and unique. I'm not sure there's been a choral collaboration like this in the world before. And that's really cool. So the ways that we achieved this in the piece was we turned the lyric generation process over to them. So I thought about how did I go about writing the lyrics at Begin? Well, I just kind of brainstormed feelings that I was feeling and feelings that I knew the world was feeling and that we might want to feel together. So I took that process and kind of outsourced it to the choir. And at one of our Zooms, Karen wrote some beautiful prompts that I have pulled up here. First, we asked, what are positive things that you're learning about yourself as we continue to live through the pandemic? We asked, has your viewpoint changed on anything in society or the world as we live through the pandemic collectively? Then we asked, what will you tell your grandchildren about this experience? And what lessons would you want to share with them? These are pretty big statements and pretty powerful. So we gave them, I think, probably about 15 minutes in breakout rooms to discuss them in small groups. And this is where that building rapport was so important, because we had already, throughout this collaboration, built in breakout room time for them to share with each other, so that when it came time to create the content for the piece, they were free in sharing that information with each other. So what I prompted them, though, with is, instead of just talking, to work together and try to shape their thoughts into a lyric, shape it into something that feels like a line of a poem, or it feels like it has music to it. And then when they came back, they threw all of these lines into the Zoom chat. And that was a really magical moment that we all shared together, when they were all populating the Zoom chat with all these wonderfully insightful and deep things that they've come up with, and how, even though one choir's in Wisconsin and one choir's in Georgia, there's a lot of shared experience there. And that came through right away in the lyrics. So then my job, so for me, when I see that as a composer, I'm like, that's gold. Just this long list of really, really deep and vivid text. And then the challenge for me was to take that and put it all into lyrics. I think Karen, after the Zoom, she was like, I don't know how you're going to take all of that and put it together. That seems like a big challenge. And it was, but it was so rewarding. So my job as the composer then came in sifting through and sorting and seeing what common themes arose from the statements that they wrote. And there are some lyrics that kind of felt more like a chorus. There were some that felt more like a verse. There were some lyrics that felt like the title. The title, Under One Sky, is what we came up with as the title of the piece. And that came directly from a student. So then I sorted all those together, and I had some musical thematic ideas as well. But we also prompted them at that same Zoom to say, based on what you've seen in the Zoom, what are you hearing in terms of musical elements?
That's where we get the really funny stuff, because they were legit. They wanted dissonances. They wanted the alto to have the melody. They wanted the key change.
Yes, they were quite insistent on the key change.
They were, and I just want to sort of interject that didn't come out of a vacuum. Like, I just want to, for your listeners, I want to really make sure that we also say, in the couple of months beforehand, we had looked at just, simple folk songs and done brief analyses of those as a group using the elements of music, and just kind of walking through that and saying, okay, what do you notice about, the melody or the harmony or the rhythm or the, whatever, the texture of the piece. And so they were sort of primed to think about those things in advance as well. So it wasn't just a sort of a spur of the moment, oh, and maybe you'll have some musical ideas as well. I mean, we were really sort of working toward that goal with the music as well as with the lyrics. And again, I'm just so impressed that you were able to take all of those ideas and make it happen.
and that preparation beautifully showed through your students. I mean, the things they came up with were just so deep. And I find as a composer, sometimes the blank canvas is more difficult to work with than the one that has a lot more structure to it. So in many ways, having all this lyric content and having these musical ideas steered me in a direction and allowed me to focus my writing for the piece and made it come together pretty quickly, because we had that Zoom. I think we discussed the lyrics in December, and then I had a draft, which was a verse and a chorus, by the next Zoom in January. And that was intentional. We had planned that I wouldn't finish the piece after that first Zoom where we had that, and that was an important aspect of it, because we wanted to get them involved in the compositional process. We didn't want it to be, okay, you said some lyric things, and here's the thing, and it's done. That's not really inviting them into the world of the composer.
That's where the collaboration really came to life, because what Karen and I were doing, collaborating in rehearsal, that's something we're really familiar with. But what Matt brought to the table was this new level and layer of collaboration where we all bring these ideas and these experiences, and we get to work directly with you and see them unfold into an actual collaborative composition at the end.
Yeah. And it was a really special moment to be able to share that with them. I mean, I don't think I've ever been more excited to share a piece with a group, because they had so much input in how it came together.
You have to talk about that opening improvisatory section, because, oh, Karen, she's doing the me too. Okay, so not only did you bring to that January rehearsal the initial, just an A-B section of their text, you hadn't finished it on purpose, and you had this cool opening. So talk about what you did and how we played it out.
So I had this idea to have a section where, so there's a chord progression that first came to mind when I wrote this piece. And I, in writing the piece, I was just improvising to it and coming up with different little fragments of motives that could or couldn't work, and combining together and throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was a moment in the piece where students are invited to improvise their own, where in a future Zoom, we ask our students to improvise. We lead them in an improvisation activity, and they record themselves improvising over these chords and then send them to me, and then that becomes a section of the piece. So the way into that was I had written some very basic, stagnant choral parts with really simple voice leading around these chords, just to get it in their ears a little bit. And then on the Zoom, what I did was I just looped the piano part and I looped the chords, and they learned each voice part and they sang what felt right to them. And then I just kind of opened some doors or windows to them and let some breezes fall where they may. And I would say, well, what if we do a little more rhythmic activity here? What if you experiment with leaps between chord tones and not just staying on the same one? And they came up with such excellent ideas. And that was a real moment where the students were taking over the act of creating the notes on the page. It's really hard to get to that and have it be truly student driven. This was one instance where it was. So they recorded themselves. Sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, I was just going to interject and say, from a pure, again, for listeners, just a step-by-step process here, leading them through the improvisation exercise is, I think, something a lot of us are comfortable with, but then again, being on Zoom, having students unmute themselves and just sing their ideas to each other, then sort of created new ideas for them. And then opening a Google form and saying, okay, now go record yourselves and submit it that way. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but the step-by-step process, I think, in this was also brilliant, because it allowed for both, those singers who felt less competent or confident to still have their voice in a safe way, to unmute and share if they wanted to use the ideas of others, even though they're not necessarily hearing what's happening around them in a rehearsal room the way we're all used to, and then pushing them into sort of new creative space. So I'll let you finish, but I just wanted to say, I think that was really an important part of the process as well.
Yeah, it definitely was. And that's something that if we were doing this live, you'd be able to hear each other and you'd be able to pick up fragments of other people's and let it influence you. So that was a really key component to the success of this. So yeah, like Karen said, they recorded themselves just a short, I didn't have time to edit long audio files. We've all been doing too much of that these days. So I just had them record like, 5 or 10 seconds. Some sent me 3 or 4, some sent just 1. Some just recorded themselves like describing what they were thinking of, but they couldn't quite articulate how they would sing it or perform it yet, but they just like recorded themselves giving me instructions, and those ended up in the piece too. So I transcribed all those, I put them all in a Sibelius file, and I did some arranging and rearranging and created a composite of all of their ideas. And another thing as a composer, through both the lyric writing and the melody writing, I felt like every voice really did matter to me as a composer. There weren't any lyrics that I read or recordings that I listened to where I was like, well, we're not using that. Every single thing that everyone sent me had an impact on the way I approached the piece. Some were directly quoted in the piece. Some were altered a little bit to fit with the others. And a lot of them provided thematic inspiration. So maybe even if it's not something that's directly going in, it had a huge impact on me in terms of my frame of reference for capturing the essence and energy of these singers. So it was really fluid for me to validate all the voices of our singers in it, and that helped a lot to have every voice heard.
And it was beautiful in that final rehearsal. We got the whole storyline of how you composed it, and you showed us where all the little Easter eggs were and where all these little nuggets were, so the singers could find their voice in the piece and then see it throughout. That was such a cool moment. And so when you did play it, that was kind of the final piece, because a collaboration isn't just showing up like, hey, I'm throwing a party, bring this. That's not a collaboration. That's an invitation to your own event. What I love about this is, hey, I want to do something. Let's see what happens. And we created this moment together with all of our singers. As you said, it's an us thing, the whole collaborative effort. And so the final little piece was we tapped on their outside abilities. And when you finally played it, you asked them to think about what they saw and put little chats in the chat bar of what the sounds and what the words and the piece as a whole were bringing forward in imagery. And then one of your singers made the art for the front cover, yes?
She did, yeah. So Tessa Schreider, one of my singers, literally during that rehearsal when we were first listening to it, just sketched something while she was listening. Rather than typing some words in the chats, she just sketched this beautiful, she said, well, this is just a rough idea of what something could be. And it was absolutely stunning. It was stunning. And so then over the course of the week, she just kind of cleaned it up and sent it back and said, well, here are, a couple of variations on that. Maybe, maybe one of these will work. Very just, humble, but gorgeous. And I love that we were able to tap into their non-musical, artistic expertise in this way as well. So thanks for inviting that, Matt. I really appreciate that.
Of course, the artwork Tessa came up with was stunning. It's the most special cover for any piece I've ever written.
It was really a cool kind of, I feel, little icing on the cake that we created in our collaboration. I didn't even know we were going to make a cake, y'all. I was thinking we were having a party, but we made cake, fancy cake with lots of layers, all the sequencing. Definitely. So for someone listening, what would be your tips if someone is thinking, okay, well, I want to have a collaboration, but hopefully we can either do it with Zoom now that we're all really comfortable, or maybe we are going to create some type of collaboration with an in-person. What are some of your collaboration tips? And Matt, what are some of your tips for working with composers? Who wants to go first?
I think beginning with the end in mind and have a clear idea of what the final product should be, but also be willing to change that idea based on how things are going. I think that's really beneficial to be responsive to your students and to adapt to their needs and meet them where they are. And compositionally, I wish that every composer could have this experience of inviting the singers in and having them have direct impact on lyric writing, on content in the piece, and even take it further. If you have more time, spread it out and spin it out and have impact on harmonic language, have impact, maybe have a bunch of different people write a verse over the chords and then have them perform them for the group and then kind of workshop them together and maybe stitch those together. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for this thing to grow and, again, create that environment that's really special for students' learning.
Yeah, I'm sort of amazed that when I think back that we really had only 5 hours together in total. I mean, that was it. You know, everything happened in between, but as far as building the community, exploring, you know, elements of music, learning to sing together, learning, you know, creating this piece together, it was a total of 5 hours. And it's I think, again, I come back to the efficiency of having outcomes, knowing exactly what you want to get out of the collaboration, and knowing that the people you can work with are really interested in a collaboration, not what can you do for me or what can I do for you, but truly, like, everybody had skin in the game here. And I really appreciated that we, all three of us, taught in every session in some way. All three of us prepared for every session in some way. And that was really critical as well. So knowing, you know, again, us starting with the outcomes of why we wanted to do this, what we wanted our students to explore, what we wanted them to learn was really key. Being flexible with the strategies, I think, was super key in this case as well. You know, whether that was using the chat or using Jamboard or, you know, using audio files, all of those things, just being really open to different kinds of strategies than we would normally have in person. Obviously, in this case, was really, really key. And I think, honestly, I think the most successful part was just that we trusted each other. Like, there was no ego involved. And I think I appreciate that perhaps the most. And kids can pick up on that. You know, they can smell that. And I think the fact that all three of us came to this with really open and generous hearts, I think that made it really just so easy. It made it easy for us, and it made it easy for our singers to feel welcomed and cherished and respected, and therefore safe enough to try these, you know, different things we were asking them to do with people they had known for, you know, 3 hours.
I think what you said too about the trust issue, it was always so exciting to come to the table for one of these. I was never stressed of, is this going to go well? Am I going to have enough content? And what was interesting too was looking at kind of how we all alternated in who was taking the lead. Yes, we all had skin in the game and we were all working at different levels within each rehearsal. But like, I did a big chunk in the beginning and then did some of that merging of the files in the middle. And then I kind of stepped back while the two of you amped up into the conversation and the lyric creating and really pulling on each other's strengths. And we got to know our strengths so quickly because we took that intentional time to get to know each other before committing to the collaboration. And I think that's important. It's like jumping into a relationship too quickly. Bad news bears.
Yeah, I think that's really key. You really touched on something important, Emmy, and that is to say, I'm not sure this would have worked as well if we didn't have complementary strengths, all three of us. And, you know, partly that's just lucky, you know, I mean, we knew each other kind of, but I'm not sure we all knew what strengths we would tap into the most in this process. So there's a bit of alchemy in this, you know, there's a bit of luck, but again, you know, coming to it without the ego present, I think, is what allowed for that to really happen organically.
It felt like such a blessing the whole time. I was just so honored that, Matt, you're willing to give of your compositional time and your compositional creativity. And
Yeah.
Karen, you're willing to share your choir and give us a space to sit beside you at the table. The whole time I was just grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I have to say, you know, my singers haven't been in the program for 30 years. They've been in the program, you know, some of them for 9 or 10 years, but, you know, just because they've come through all the way from when they were younger. But, you know, they might know that we are, you know, that we have this longevity because they see our alums come back for concerts and things like that. But I mean, just to get to know your singers, I think was so impactful for them to also see that there are singers in, you know, in another part of the country who love music and who love singing as much as they do, and who are curious in the way that they are curious, and who are open and caring and you know, really want to do their very best in this process. I think really focusing on the process rather than the product was also a huge key to this success. I mean, we really, Matt, you sort of touched on this by saying, you know, remaining flexible, but I really think that, you know, the outcomes were more about process rather than saying, okay, our outcome is we're going to create this thing. That was really never it. That, the outcomes were about exploring, affective, feelingful things and, and wanting to increase their knowledge of the musical elements. And that, those are the kinds of things that, that don't point to this specific final product, but they sure impact the process.
And as a composer, I didn't know what this song was going to be about until I saw them put things in the Zoom chat. So you just have to, that's kind of checking ego at the door too, is remembering that it's not about you, it's about them and getting their voice out there.
It's interesting that we didn't sing the last song together. Have you thought about that at all? Like, it wasn't even, I didn't think anything of it until I was programming and just thinking of what we're doing for our final concert in May. And I have this little Matt Carlson set. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we haven't sang Under One Sky with our friends from Wisconsin. Wait, does that matter? It doesn't matter. We still had this amazing, like, that wasn't the thing. It wasn't the pinnacle that we recorded some virtual choir. We did that in the middle for Begin.
We did that and I think that's, like, for me, sorry to interrupt, but
no, go.
I feel like that's almost the best part, is that it really shows what mattered most to us, right? Like, it wasn't about this final thing. Like, Begin was great, and that video is beautiful, and it was so fun, and the girls loved singing and seeing that. But the fact of the matter is, it was really about the process of creating this together. And, while it's a little strange that we won't sing it together, it also feels totally right that we're not singing it together.
We'll sing it Under One Sky at different times. Oh, this is so perfect. I'm so thankful that you both are willing to come on and share your collaboration story. Is there one thing you want to leave the listener with before we sign off on this little collaborative story?
I guess for me, I really want to encourage people to think outside the box of what seems possible. This is the sort of thing that, we've all been pushed in new directions because of the pandemic. And I certainly never thought we would have a successful collaboration, from 1,000 miles away, literally never getting our singers together with either the other singers or the composer as we created this experience for them. And I hope that we don't feel limited when we come back, right, to what's in front of us in person. That sounds really strange, because I can't wait to get back in front of my singers. I cannot wait to get back in front of my singers. But I'm so pleased with the way in which this unfolded, because we cared so deeply about our kids. Like, really, that's what it got down to, is this was a manifestation of the love we have for our singers, and the way, a way for us to really create more than the sum of our parts.
That's beautiful.
And to allow ourselves to let the project live and let it grow where it wants to grow, and let its branches spread out where the light hits them, and don't try to force them in any place that they're not wanting to go. And that was something that was really rewarding for me as a composer. It just felt really organic, really smooth the whole time.
It's been such a joy. I will miss our monthly Sunday meetups like crazy, but I know that this is a seed. These are branches. These are leaves planted in my choir's life that will last for a long time.
Absolutely. I feel the same. Thank you both so much.
Oh, thank you, Karen.
Ditch the ego at the door. Keep the students in the center. Utilize democratic processes in a sequence that sets your singers up for success, and then watch the cake be made. I sincerely cannot wait to hear what ideas and what things you get from this episode, even if it's just the warm fuzzies, because this was such a beautiful relationship that we shared all year, and I will desperately miss my Sunday evenings with Matt and Karen as we move forward. But I know that this collaboration will live on in the music that we created and in the relationships that our singers joined together in. I sincerely hope that just like this collaboration, you know that you matter. We all know that music matters, especially when we're doing it in collaboration. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.